Welcome everyone to our webinar, Transforming Healthcare Interoperability Testing with FHIRplace. My name is Lisa Palmer and I'm the Vice President of Research, Innovation, and Development here at Drummond. Now I'm very excited to introduce today's speakers. We have a great group of panelists. Each of our panel participants is an active member of the pilot in Drummond's new FHIRplace program. But before we dive in, I want to let them introduce themselves to you. So Timothy Bennett, I am going to start with you.
Hi, thanks, Lisa. My name's Timothy Bennett. I'm the Director of Strategic Healthcare Initiatives at Drummond, and FHIRplace project is what I'm sort of heading up, and excited to share with everyone and with my colleagues here on this webinar, sort of this what we'll introduce here is sort of a next generation of interoperability testing for FHIR.
Thanks, Tim. Rob, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Brull. I currently serve as a Senior Product Director at Infor. I'm responsible for all the FHIR products in our portfolio. I have 25 years of experience in product and as a solution consultant, and the last 13 years of those have been dealing with HL7 standards like V2 and CDA and now FHIR. And I'm certified as FHIR R4 proficiency and also as a CDA specialist, and happy to be a part of the panel today.
Great. Thanks, Rob. We're excited to have you. Mark, why don't you tell us about your background?
Hi everyone. Mark Scrimshire. I'm Chief Interoperability Officer at Onyx Health, where I lead the product development for our Onyx OS FHIR Interoperability platform. In relation to my FHIR experience, I was previously the CMS entrepreneur in residence, responsible for the development and launch of the CMS Blue Button 2 API that basically makes data available to 53 million Medicare beneficiaries, and that became the model for the CMS interoperability and patient access rule. I'm also retained by HL7. I'm a project lead for the HL7 Da Vinci Payer Data Exchange work group, where I am actually the author of the Payer Data Exchange implementation guide that is cited by CMS in their latest prior authorization rule. I also have my fingers in the Karen Blue Button formulary and PlanNet implementation guides and a few other things besides. And I'm also the co-chair of the HL7 Financial Management Work Group. So great to meet you all.
Thanks, Mark. Alexander, tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Alex Zautke. I work for FHIRly. I joined FHIRly over 6 years ago as a developer, and more recently I transitioned into the role of product management for our main FHIR product, our FHIR CDR, FHIRly server. I'm based in Germany, so usually I'm more concerned with the European side of things. However, I'm also here to make sure that we have all the features in place for our US certifications. Additionally, I'm heavily involved in HL7 standards development, so I'm part of the FHIR infrastructure working group as well as the technical steering committee for HL7 International.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you everyone for giving us a little bit about your background. As you can see, we have a wealth of knowledge and experience with us today. But before we dive into hearing their insights, I do want to first turn it over to Timothy to give some background and tell us exactly what this new FHIRplace program is all about, and then we'll transition into discussing more about that with the panelists. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, just so the audience has a little bit of background about what FHIRplace is, what Drummond is doing with FHIR interoperability testing, and our colleagues here who are, part of our pilot program. I think, I kind of call it now we're sort of in a post-patient access FHIR world. The cures rule and CMS's interoperability rule, both of those in 2020 established some of the first FHIR federal regulations around FHIR with patient access, and gives patients access to their health information for the first time through smartphone apps in a standardized way, at least with these FHIR IGs. But those don't really pose, while very important, they're not typically very interesting interoperability issues. Not like what I call these sort of next wave, next generation of FHIR use cases, which are um, they're multi-actor, many different actors within the data exchange ecosystem. They're bidirectional, they're workflow based, they're very complex and complicated. So there's many to many partners that includes payers, providers, intermediaries, HIEs, and I'm not even sure we yet know, especially in the prior authorization world, who all will be participating, in these FHIR transactions and the messaging choreography that's going to go back and forth. But so I wanted to call attention to a few of these emerging IGs, of which are part of recent rulemaking from CMS. They're in also part of ONC's proposed HDI2 rule. There's also other rulemaking being made now. And so I want to call attention to payer-payer data exchange, prior authorization burden reduction, and also patient cost transparency. These sort of represent some very high stakes FHIR use cases that has an opportunity to really impact healthcare in the U.S., reduce the cost of it, and also improve patient outcomes and patient experience, with their interaction with the U.S. healthcare system. Like patient cost transparency, for instance, um, this is on the heels of the Congressional No Surprises Act, which says a patient has a right to know how much their medical procedure is going to cost, before it happens. And this is a very complex workflow of conversations between many providers and a payer to get that estimate, to the patient. And if that can be accomplished, and it can be with FHIR, um, then that's going to be a big service to the patient. Prior authorization is a $17 billion cost to the industry. It's a mostly manual process. Providers have whole uh, staffs devoted just to looking up prior authorization documentation requirements and submitting those to payers and getting a prior authorization decision back to the patient. It's time consuming, it's very costly, and FHIR has an opportunity to streamline that and automate that. And payer-payer data exchange, again, is a patient has a right for their data to follow them as they move from health plan to health plan. And the payer-payer data exchange, uh, FHIR IG, will enable that to happen. But these are complicated FHIR messaging choreographies with many participants, and the stakes are very high for this to work out of the box, and we're going to need some um, sort of new ideas on how we can do scalable testing of implementations in order for this to work in the real world. Next slide, please. So the way sort of FHIR is sort of implemented in testing now, it starts with good IGs and reference implementations that are that are developed, and then we have test tools uh, and connectathons that enable implementations to test their implementations of the FHIR IGs and also to see if the FHIR IG is even a good one, if it needs to be modified or changed or enhanced as we have initial testing. This is all on the road to sort of eventually having interoperability with these implementations, but it starts with these small steps, um, and and eventually developers will spend a lot of time testing their implementations. And there could be, like in the case of ONC, there could or Drummond also has some conformance certification programs where uh, implementations are tested to see if they are conformant with the IGs. But as we'll see in the next slide, conformance does not guarantee interoperability. And so uh, what is sort of needed is a way to do interoperability testing once the implementations have been implemented and self-tested and and are conformant to the spec, this next step in guaranteeing interoperability is for these implementations to, test with each other. Now, this goes back, to Drummond over 20 years ago, or I guess now it's 25 years ago or so, at the advent of the internet being used for business purposes. There were standards emerging that enabled businesses to use the internet for secure document exchange. And Drummond was sort of right there. I had a front row seat to it because I worked for GE at the time, and we were implementing these internet standards. And Drummond would host these interoperability test events where implementers, developers could come together and test their products with each other. And I did that. I brought my secure data exchange implementations using these standards to these interoperability test events and tested with my competitors and my peers in the marketplace. And coming out of these test events were essentially these products with version were certified as being interoperable with each other to these internet standards. And this had ended up having so much value in the B2B marketplace with trading partners, and that Walmart adopted these standards as the protocols. If you were going to do business with Walmart, you had to adopt these protocols, and you needed to go through these Drummond interoperability certification test events. And so, this became, this sort of fueled the marketplace to do this interoperability testing and enabled the B2B space to become interoperable with each other. The market could pick and choose which products they wanted, to buy with the confidence that they were going to be able to be interoperable with their trading partners, no matter what software system, that they had purchased and implemented. And so Drummond has been doing these interoperability test events in the B2B space continuously. We're still doing them all this time later, 20 plus years later. And so what we have learned from that experience as we sort of look into these new use cases with FHIR that are very complex and have many partners, trading partners, if you will, where the secure data has to be exchanged in an interoperable way. We feel like we have the experience and the expertise and some automated technologies that sort of facilitates doing that at a scalable way. And that's essentially, you can go to the next slide if you would like. So that's essentially what we're building here with FHIRplace. Is we're taking our platform that we developed to do testing for B2B space and adapting it to FHIR so that we can do these FHIR use cases along with these, these new IGs and facilitate these interoperability test events. And that's really sort of at the core of FHIRplace, is that we will have these test events 1 or 2 times a year ultimately for each of these sort of IGs that are important in the industry, that have high value and need to have a high level, high confidence of interoperability. And so that we will bring together the implementations, facilitate them testing with each other in a scalable and automated way, and then at the end of these test events, produce and publish a report that says these products with version are interoperable for pair-to-pair data exchange or prior authorization or whatever other IG use case that we add to our FHIRplace program. And so that's might get into this a little bit deeper later, but essentially, the products sort of integrate with Drummond's FHIRplace test client, and our test client sort of acts as sort of a traffic cop, if you will, to direct products to send messages to each other, or receive messages from another participant, and then sort of collect the results of that message exchange, and in that way, we're able to run thousands of tests and find issues where the tests were not successful, and then be able to uh, investigate as to why, fix those interoperability issues, and then rerun the tests until they all pass with every participant testing with each other. And so that's what we call a full matrix interoperability test event. And the reason why we need to do these periodically is that the IGs change, the products change, we have new products entering the marketplace, and so it's important to periodically redo the interoperability test event to keep the report of who are the interoperable products fresh and up to date. Next slide. So just real briefly here, we as I mentioned earlier, and my colleagues here, they're part of the pilot that we're doing for payer data exchange for FHIRplace. This is our first step in a timeline that's going to take us out a number of years as we march towards and even beyond the rulemaking deadlines in 2026 and 2027, 2028 for first for payer data exchange, and then we'll begin to tackle prior authorization starting in 2025, and then beyond that, probably patient cost transparency and whatever other use cases sort of come up that we want to add to the program as well. And I think that's it, Lisa.
Thank you, Tim, for that overview. I appreciate it. Now, as you mentioned there at the end, we started with PDEX as our first use case, and we have a formal public test event upcoming for that in the fall. The pilot for PDEX is happening right now, and the panelists on this call are part of that pilot. So I would like to turn our attention now to the panelists and really get to hear this now from their perspective. So I'm going to kick this off with a basic question that I would like all of our panelists to answer. Why did you choose to participate in the FHIRplace program? And I'm going to start, Mark, with you.
Thanks, Lisa. So the reason we got involved as Onyx with the program is for a couple of reasons. One, I'm actually authoring payer data exchange as a specification, so I'm very keen to see that it is actually implementable, and particularly to some of Tim's points in his presentation, this needs to be done at scale. We're talking potentially thousands of practitioners wanting to reach out to hundreds, if not thousands, of payers, and really what we're I'm looking for is how we can map out the right recipes so that these things like discovery of the endpoints and then registration, getting hold of relevant credentials, can be largely automated and be very predictable. So this, with the original patient access rule, it was relatively simple. This is going to be far more complex, and that's really why we want to be ready and pretty certain that our APIs are going to work as everyone expects.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense, Mark. Rob, why did you choose to participate in the FHIRplace program?
Yeah, well, I think when Timothy first came and proposed the idea, as a product guy, I'm thinking, well, how can we make better products, and how can we make it easier to implement? And so I think that the certification program lines up with both of those. And so certainly from an implementation perspective, some of the things that Mark just mentioned around automation, scalability, predictability, working out kind of the variability that you sometimes see in the marketplace, even if you're trying to comply with the implementation guides. Avoiding some of those issues makes implementation go faster and much more seamless for the customer. So that really stuck out. And then we can take that back to our dev team and work more flexibility into our product so that it's more adaptable to the way implementations are taking place in the marketplace and the way different vendors have interpreted the rules, maybe that the more nuanced parts of the implementation guide. It just made sense, to be a part of this, and then to be able to deliver the higher quality products and help implementation hopefully go better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, Alexander, what about from your perspective at FHIRly?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I think we had great answers so far. Let me try to add from a FHIRly perspective. So at FHIRly, we have a great focus on quality and testing. And when we started to develop the PDEX peer-to-peer API, our testing team was saying that you can't develop these um, implementation guides as a standalone component because you have a very complex workflow behind it. You have a complex authorization system that you need to manage. You have multiple custom operations that you need to integrate with each other. So it's not feasible well, not encouraged to test these implementation guides with a static set of test cases. So what really encouraged us to join the FHIRplace was the possibility to test against real-world clients, to have different inputs sent to our server and see how our APIs are going to react, and then make sure that we are staying compliant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes sense. I know you've all been working with developing and rolling out FHIR standards for some time, from your bios and from some of what you've already said. I would love to hear kind of to date, how have you normally handled FHIR interoperability testing in your organizations, and maybe what kind of challenges you've encountered along the way with that? I'm going to have you all answer this one as well, but Rob, let's start with you.
All right. So yeah, from kind of status quo, how do we test? Of course, we have our own internal testing that our QA group goes through, and among that, we use also Aegis Touchstone. We use Fire validators. We use the Inferno testing tools. We go to the Connectathons initially to test things out, and then along the way, we'll repeat and test the latest version of our products that we're developing on at the Connectathons. So there's a lot we do already. I would say the challenge is around implementation. And when we get out into the field, the more, like I said, nuanced things of the implementation guide that the testing tools, test the core stuff, but maybe not some of the more details around implementation. So having a group of people that will work together with the certification and getting a more structured, rigorous testing environment around that, I think will really help with the implementation and kind of just take it to the next level. Kind of like, the highway that Timothy talks about with regards to the evolution of testing and getting to this certification program. This is kind of the final step to really round it out and cover things that maybe got missed in all those previous steps because they're just specific at the time and not with tested partners in a rigorous testing environment.
Yeah, well said. I think that rounding out concept of a final step makes a lot of sense. Alexander, how about you? What have you done to date with testing, and what challenges
Mhm.
have you encountered with that?
Let me try to start with the challenges that we see. At FHIRly, we are most of the time just a reseller, meaning that we have our own FHIR server, but most of our customers are tech vendors themselves who want to have a certified FHIR component. But we are not directly interacting with the providers. So our challenge is getting real world data and making sure that we can handle all these use cases at a live site. So most of the time we just test with synthetic data. For that, we are using the Inferno testing tool, which worked really well for the G10 certification. But again, for G10, it was more like a static catalog of tests that you need to pass in order to get your certifications. And here it becomes, as Mark said previously, way more complex, way more challenging of connecting to each other, making sure that that all goes smoothly in order to reduce the burden on the payer side as well as of the provider side. Because now that we're introducing like a provider access API, real providers will directly interact with that API. Same for the prior auth API. So we need to make sure that they are as robust and fast as possible.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And Mark, You have a lot of experience in this area. What's your perspective from that testing and challenge point of view?
At Onyx, we use a lot of internal testing tools. We will do regression testing and so on when we're working on new releases. But we've also gone through the process. We use Inferno, we use Touchstone. We've even gone through the Drummond certification tests for all of the APIs recommended in the original rule. But for example, one of our products, Move My Health Data, we're connected to 350 different health plans. And the effort that was required in actually accomplishing that was enormous. And this really speaks to why we want to be involved in FHIRplace, is that as you get away from the API itself into the integration and connecting to others, that's where all the variability that Rob talked about really comes into play. And if we are going to successfully move the industry forward and get these APIs adopted at scale, it's really got to be plug and work. And for that, we're going to need certifications like FHIRplace that is going to really reach out further out into the registration, the discovery, etc., to make sure that things are predictable. There's only so much you can do with making your own sandbox available to others that want to connect in. We've got to make this consistent and predictable.
Yeah. As you've talked about and others, there's all these different testing options out there that have been used so far, and they really have moved the industry forward in many ways. But FHIRplace is different in our approach to testing. So, Mark, kind of following on with what you were just saying, how do you see then FHIRplace as different from other interoperability testing solutions that exist today?
Well, I think part of it is we're effectively going to be going and doing ongoing testing. And it really, we're almost getting to the point where we are effectively certifying an ecosystem. And at the end of the day, what are we all doing as vendors is we really want to make it easier for our clients to be able to implement solutions and be compliant and get business value. And if implementing and connecting potentially tens of thousands of providers, maybe even more, is not easy, it's never going to happen. And so we've got really, it's incumbent on us as, I suppose, pioneers in the industry to really help work this out and show the way that this can be done in a predictable, standards-based manner.
Yeah. Rob, I'd love to hear your perspective on this too. Kind of how do you see this being different than maybe some of the other testing approaches you were talking about previously?
Yeah, I think Mark said it pretty well, but I'll expound a little bit maybe on the ecosystem of testing, to where I don't see it as Infor getting certified or FHIRly getting certified or Onyx getting certified. I see it as kind of a group certification, where we're all in this together. We're testing our solutions and our variabilities against each other, in a predictable and scalable way. And that gives anybody confidence that's going to use our solutions that that we've gone through this, and that when we get out in the field, we're going to be hopefully more adaptable and quicker to implement and able to handle the scalability, and that can give the customers confidence that we'll be able to handle that. And so I see that as the difference, key difference. And that it's kind of a group certification in my mind versus individual just testing with the testing tool.
Yeah. I like how you said that, because that was one of our intentions, really, is that this is more of a community, and not just a one-off test event for individuals. And so I think that was a great point to make there. I do want to talk a little bit about technical details for those on the webinar today who might want to understand a little bit about how this works in practice. Without going too deep here, but just giving a little bit of insight into that, I'm going to ask you, Tim, can you tell us a little more about how do participants actually integrate with FHIRplace as part of this program?
In essence, and this goes back to our B2B days, that we developed sort of this technology in order to facilitate an automated way, um, to run many tests with many different participants. Is we have this lightweight client that is highly decoupled from each of the products from the participants. Um, the the coupling essentially is, they deploy their client on the back end with their product, and our Drummond server can communicate to the client, and essentially it drops off a message, which is essentially an XML document that specifies which test is going to be run with, a participant, a partner, and some, maybe some test data or maybe some other specifics about a particular test, as uh, sort of realized from an overall test plan that we have. So we have a test plan, well, like say payer data exchange, and it's broken down into a bunch of test cases. And so these messages that gets dropped off by our client to each of the products informs them of what tests that they need to execute with another participant or be prepared to receive from another participant. And then at the end, it sort of collects the artifacts of the results of that, data exchange, between those two partners. Um, and so then this is propagated with all the different participants. Each plays the role, sender, receiver, that they're capable of doing. And so at the end of the test, everyone is tested every test case with each other for every role that they can play. And so we sort of have this comprehensive way of testing. And so this, um, it's a non-invasive way of 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 triggering, if you will, the products to execute tests among themselves. So, you know, FHIRplace differs from like a tool like Inferno or Touchstone, which acts as a client uh, to the FHIR server and does queries and looks at the responses. Our product, FHIRplace, does not do that at all. It essentially is basically, as much as it can, is out of the way and just facilitating the products testing with each other. And ultimately, interoperability is proved by the products themselves, who say we exchanged these data transaction with each other, and both sides gives it the thumb up that we got the response that we were expected. We could parse it. It was what it looked good. Or in the case that it couldn't be completed, it sort of gives the thumbs down, and then that's how we, when we sort of correlate um, uh, the results of a test, we're able to very quickly see that this particular test between these participants failed, and so then we can go investigate, why that happened, and correct the issue that caused the test to fail. And so, our test events sort of, systematically goes through the test plan with all the test cases, and everyone has a chance to resolve their issues, and we keep testing until everyone, passes the test essentially. So that's 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 sort of in a nutshell how it works. Um, there's certainly more details to that, Lisa, and
Yeah.
if folks are interested, we can certainly go into that later. But um, it's a method um, that we have developed and perfected, I think, uh, over 20 years in the B2B space. Now, there's a lot of adaptation for the FHIR space, right? And that's the reason why we're having a pilot, is because we're having to change some things, and and FHIR is a different animal than the B2B space, and so that's the purpose of our pilot. And we want to show the FHIR community and the users of these implementations that this kind of testing can happen, and it can happen in a scalable way, and it can happen in an automated way, so that we're able to not break everyone's backs trying to do this level of testing, and it becomes so hard no one does it, right? We want to enable a way to do that, and so that's in a
I think
nutshell.
that automation that you're saying is really a key component of that,
It
right? To
is.
making
It is.
it successful. Um, I want to kind of look back at the evolution here that we're seeing in the industry, and then with FHIRplace along with it. So, Alexander, I'm gonna ask you a question here.
Mhm.
You're early to the table here, starting off with PDEX and the pilot. We've seen, Tim kind of showing the evolution, right, and the healthcare landscape as we go from one use case then to the next. How do you see FHIRplace evolving and sort of influencing that health IT landscape in the future?
Yeah, let me start by saying that Mark and his team did a fantastic job at HS7 of creating the
Mhm.
PDEX implementation guide and trying to get people around the Fire connector zones to test reference implementations. But I think now we're moving into the next phase of trying to get PDEX into production. And here at the FHIRplace, we are seeing now the first systems at Infor and Onyx and FHIRly that try to achieve that, making it scalable. So what we can do in order to enhance the standard and give back to the industry is to come up with blueprints and solutions that we know that work because we tested them and make sure that everybody could exchange in an interoperable way all information involved. So yeah, we're trying to run through the process and give back the best practices to the community.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little about, interoperability challenges of the past. Rob, I'm going to ask you, as we're kind of looking at interoperability challenges of the past, interoperability has been a goal we've had in this industry for a long time. How do you see FHIRplace kind of helping to address some of those interoperability challenges and kind of applying the lessons we've learned to date as we move forward?
Yeah, I would kind of draw the parallel to the AS2 that Timothy talked about, where in the B2B world for supply chain, I think it was that this similar scenario has played out and been very advantageous in that industry. And I guess I'm putting a little faith in Timothy that that it'll play out again well in our scenario. But the idea of Drummond providing the platform, and as Timothy says, trying to get out of the way as much as possible, but still being the coordinator, the documenter, the certifier. I think that's going to help with the challenges and let us, participate in an environment that has some rigor and has the tools and the platform for us to coordinate with the other vendors. But just that testing out with other vendors in a as much of a real world environment as it can be before we get out in the field is just the hugest thing for us. And I think it'll really help with delivering products to the market that can be implemented much faster and propel the industry forward.
Yes. Now, Tim, is there anything, coming from the B2B space yourself, anything you'd add to that about kind of applying some of those lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and Mark kind of touched on this a little while ago, with just the complexity of these, uh, you know, implementations. Um, the way that we sort of do testing a lot is, develop a reference implementation, so that implementers can test against a reference implementation. That's a common practice. You develop an implementation guide, someone develops a reference implementation, and then that serves sort of as a basis when developers begin to implement an IG on their own. And again, that's all very necessary, but there becomes a point when these systems become so complex that you can't build a a reference implementation that's going to be good enough to to test against. And in fact, if you try to do that, you begin to sort of develop a complex product. And so and sort of corollary to that, then there's a push to develop these complex sandboxes as well that people can jump into and participate in a test. And and those have value too. But I think what we see at Drummond is that the products themselves that developers are developing, like Onyx, like Infor, like FHIRly, they already have the complexity built in to these products, because these are real world products that are going to be deployed, as solutions, and going to enable this sort of, you know, unprecedented level of health data exchange. They already have the complex. They are already reference implementations of the highest order, if you will, and by sort of Drummond sort of enabling a way to sort of document the testing with each other, um, you know, without it sounding kind of strange or weird, sort of the internet is its own sandbox, if you want to think of it that way. We just have to connect everyone together. We don't necessarily need, another piece of software that's a sandbox. I mean, really, what we feel like we need to do is just to facilitate the products themselves testing with each other. And I think that's sort of um, the simple elegance of sort of this way of doing interoperability testing. I don't think it ha- I don't think it has to be any more complicated than that. And I'm not trying to say this isn't hard or it's not complex, because it's all of those things. But we don't have to build another contraption, if you will, or another test tool, if you will. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that's the thing I just want to maybe shine the spotlight on,
Sure.
is sort of the elegance of the methodology here.
Yeah. I'm gonna have one more question to our panel, and then we're gonna turn over to some audience questions. We have a PDEX test event open to the public happening this fall, and then we will be beginning prior authorization testing in 2025. Some of the work on that beginning later this year. If an organization listening to this is looking to implement the guides specified in the prior authorization rule, I really want to kind of get to what is the benefit of them engaging in FHIRplace now. Mark, I'm going to have you close us out on this one.
Um, you you can't overemphasize the importance of engaging in testing early. You do not leave it to the last minute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the other thing I'd say is, with this, we're really underselling when we say it's a FHIR sort of testing platform, right? We're actually using a whole series of standards to make things happen, and we need to test the whole thing together. You know, how is the identity services tying in? We've got OAuth, you've got potentially SAML, you've got Smart on FHIR, you've got the FHIR APIs specification themselves, and then the implementation guides. This is complex stuff. This is why increasingly, payers and providers out there are looking to organizations like all of us, because we come with a solution, not a bunch of parts that you have to plug together. And we've really got to, I say, I'll go back to my original point. It's not just about testing the API. It's about how can we wrap into the recipes that are going to say, this is how you can automate the registration, how you can automate getting hold of the credentials you need to securely exchange data with these APIs. If we don't solve that, and I think FHIRplace can help in getting us there, alongside other things that are happening with Trebuchet, Project Trebuchet, and with the general
Mm-hmm.
set of testing that's going on. We're going to come up with these recipes, and they're absolutely essential, because if we don't, we are going to be facing literally hundreds of man years being invested in just getting a credential. Because if you think of each practitioner is connected to 20 payers, that's not unusual. right? So if they've got to go through a process that is going to take their IT department weeks to get through with a given payer, and you multiply that across the industry, we are just heading for a world of chaos. So we absolutely have to get this testing ecosystem working so that our clients can look and say, well, yes, I'm using that vendor and that vendor and that vendor, and they've all tested in this environment. So we know they should just literally plug and work.
Well said, Mark. All right, I'm going to take a few audience questions here before we wrap up today. So the first one is, what is the process for getting participants to work with each other? What is involved? Tim, let's have you address this one.
Yeah, and it might be sort of interesting to hear from the pilot participants here from their perspective. But there's obviously there's a business component because this is we are doing ultimately a certification test, but the technical part of it is really the big first step is that the participants have to integrate with our testing client so that they can receive the sort of trigger messages and then be able to drop off the result artifacts of their test. However, I will say once that is done, then it's then the testing can can take place. So that's really the core piece of getting the participants to work with each other is everyone integrate with the test client.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll sort of say, once that lift is done, so there's initial investment by the participants to do that, but once they have done that one time, then even as we sort of modify the test plan over time, or even if we sort of move to another IG and build out different test cases, you know they still sort of have that that integration with the test client is still done and can just be reused on variations on the theme. So it, we've made this initial investment pays off dividends down
Mm-hmm.
down the road continuously.
That makes a lot of sense. That's good to know as well. Looking at another question here was, how will this solution help payers with their implementations? I'm going to open that one up to anyone who would like to answer on our panel today. So how will this solution help payers with their implementations?
I'll take a shot at that, Lisa. I can tell you from the original patient access API requirements from CMS, the fact that we could point to a set of certifications reduces the testing requirement for the payer. Now, if we take this and look at the prior authorization rule that is going into effect, the level of complexity is like at least 10 times what was the original interoperability rule. And you potentially have far more participants involved. Think of the prior authorization. You could have a provider talking to the payer. The payer then, in many cases, may have 4 or 5 different utilization management or prior auth vendors that they then want to redirect the prior authorization to. And maybe the payer is going to do the first part of the prior auth, the coverage requirements discovery, but hand it off to do documents, templates, and rules with the prior authorization vendor. And then ultimately the result has to get back through the payer to the provider, right? It's far more complex. And so anything that we can do to provide certifications that say this works exactly as it's expected to do, and you have multiple players in that are involved in that saying it works exactly as it's expected to do, that is a tremendous potential benefit to payers as well as providers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And maybe let me add here that it also helps a payer to compare their server API behavior to other servers. So it's no longer an option to have, let's say, small quirks into the API, because it will cost a developer on the other side to interact with that many hours if the behavior is slightly different than what is expected. So making sure that everything is uniform is the advantage here.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and add that I think things are just vetted out, right? So whenever you're implementing any product, if it's the first version of the product or the first version of the implementation, you expect issues, right? So we're kind of leapfrogging that to where, by doing the certification testing and building this out amongst the vendors, you've kind of you're even if you are the first payer group of payers that's getting on board, you're not jumping in so early because there's things have been vetted out before the payers have even gotten involved. And so when from a business perspective, the time to value, the value that you're getting by doing prior authorization electronically or payer data exchange electronically, that value is going to come much quicker to your business by using a technology that is already going through that vetting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's some definite ROI there. I'm going to take one last question here from the audience, and then we will wrap up for today. This question, Tim, I think is going to come your way at least first. How much information does FHIRplace provide in its results? What error info is produced? How can customers use that information?
Yeah, I feel like this maybe is a multi-part. You know, there's the information that FHIRplace provides to the participants, during the test, um, and then, what do we report out at the end of the test that would be public, right? I feel like two maybe two parts to this
Mhm.
question. At least that's how how I'm going to address it here. Um, so I think, you know, within FHIRplace, we do have a user interface that the participants use, and they can see all of the results of all the tests. I mentioned that there's a message dropped off it by our server through our client with each of the participants, and that has a set of instructions they're that they're going to follow. Um, we're able to report out the results of each of those sort of steps so that the participants can see that, and so that there's a way not only to know that if there was an issue with the data exchange transaction that happened, where exactly in the process did that sort of happen? Because lots of times there's multiple steps to some of these tests, and so the participants themselves sort of have access to some granular data associated with each of the tests, and so that helps to facilitate um, investigation when there is an interoperability issue that kind of comes up. And there's a graphical matrix, so that a participant, when they log into their workspace at the beginning of their day, maybe there were tests that were run at night while they were asleep. They can sort of look at the matrix results, see the ones that passed, see the ones that failed, and then begin to do investigation there to fix them. It sort of snowballs as it goes along. Once you begin to fix issues, then you sort of have a pretty high sloping curve, and then to where all the tests eventually pass. So we sort of have this fairly sophisticated interface that the participants can all see, how the tests go. And that's something that's been developed over many years. So, that's the advantage of us adapting an already developed platform, to FHIR. We get all of that. We don't have to build that new. When we report out the results, we have a test plan. We show this is the things that were tested. Uh, Here's all the products that participated. You know, we kind of have this sort of motto, among the participants, because they are competitors in the marketplace, that whatever happens in the test event stays in the test event. We don't sort of um, show the public, you know, the knickers, so to speak, that happens during the testing. Um, we report out the results, which at the end everyone passed all of the tests, and so in that sense, um, that's sort of how we facilitate building a trust of a community who may be competitors in the marketplace. They can come together in confidence and test their products, and um, then be able to emerge from that as being part of a you know as as sort of Mark and Rob kind of talked about, sort of a certified ecosystem, if you will, of products that are with each other. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully that helps answer the
Yeah,
question.
I think that's a great summary there, Tim, of kind of how that is displayed both during the testing and then the final outcomes. We are about at time, so I want to thank our panelists today for all of your contributions, both to our pilot and to our discussion today. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the webinar and taking the time out of your day. You can visit drummondgroup.com to find out more about FHIRplace and how you can get involved. We invite you to join our fall PDEX test event or begin work with us on prior authorization later this year. You can also set up a free consultation with Timothy using the QR code that is displaying right now on your screen. With that, have a great day, everyone. We will see you at the next webinar. Thanks so much.